Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michael, and on behalf of the EcoWatch team at Whale Coast Conservation, a very warm welcome to you all this evening. Whale Coast Conservation is committed to the protecting of our shared natural environment within the Overberg area. From the onset, we want to stress that we are not against development or the building of roads, but what we are against, where we draw this line in the sand, is that we're against any proposed development within the boundaries of a proclaimed protected nature reserve. One such plan is the Hermanus Bypass Road, proposed to run through the Fernkloof Nature Reserve. And after some 12 years of work, the current consultants have now released the final amended environmental impact assessment report for all of our comments, before it is then sent to province for approval or rejection. The EcoWatch team made up of Dr. Pat Miller and Mr. Rob Fryer have carefully gone through all the documents in this latest amended environmental impact assessment. And this evening, we want to share with you 5 of the key concerns that we have. These are traffic, the failure to consider alternatives, the proposed biodiversity offset, the lack of municipality objectivity in this report, and the failure of the voice of the people to be heard. Our EcoWatch team is almost finished finalizing our objections into a comprehensive document, which will be completed by the end of July. We have all of your email addresses, and in the first week of August, you'll be hearing from us, where we will be sharing a very quick and easy way for all of you to lodge your own objections. I want to stress that this is the very last chance we have for our voices to be heard. Even if over the last 12 years, you have signed a petition, or you've written comments, or you've lodged objections, remember, this is the final amended environmental impact assessment, and therefore we need fresh objections. It's almost as if the reset button has been pushed. So we urge you all now to mobilize your friends, your family, and to please submit official comments in writing by the end of August. So without further ado, let's get into it. And I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Pat Miller to take us through the first of our many issues, which is traffic. Pat, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks to everyone for signing on for this webinar and for showing the interest and for the objections that you're going to lodge. Let's go straight into the traffic section of it. As Michael said, it's been 12 years since the very beginning of it. So let's just remind ourselves of what that very beginning was. In about 2008, the Overstrand administration initiated an investigation into a possible bypass road that would run along the northern mountainside from the gateway traffic lights on the western side and exiting the town past Fynkloof on the eastern side. And if you look at the map in front of you, that's that yellow line becomes dotted, so tear along the dotted line, as they say, and exit out the end of town. That was the idea of the bypass. They produced a report in 2009 that supported this idea. And you'll notice that that bypass doesn't only skirt the town to the north, but it goes all the way through Fernkloof. Then we get to the Overstrand Transport Plan of 2014, and that also included an investigation into the need and desirability and then possible alignments of a bypass along the mountainside of Hermanus. But they concluded that predicted traffic growth did not warrant such a bypass. This plan importantly also said that dualling of the relief road would cope adequately with future traffic demands to the east. Bear in mind that most of the traffic from Gateway to the east is actually schools traffic. There's your relief road, the blue road that we see. And there you can see the existing R43. The R43 runs there along west to east. The relief road carries on the top with the blue, but the R43 carries on, makes that bit of a dogleg in the center of the CBD. So they concluded that the relief road, just to remind you, that blue one, would cope adequately with future traffic demands. But these conclusions were then reinterpreted by the administration to assume that although a full bypass could not by any stretch of the imagination be justified, a partial bypass, so that's the solid yellow line, a partial bypass, that is a, quote, shorter Hermanus CBD bypass between Mountain Drive and the R43 Fairways Avenue intersection, that's where it joins onto Main Road again, would be needed and desirable. Now, obviously, a municipality of Hermanus's side couldn't afford to build such a road. It's quite an undertaking. And so the Provincial Department of Transport and Public Works undertook it as a traffic project that would supposedly benefit the town by firstly easing congestion on the R43, that dogleg in red there, through the center of Hermanus, and secondly enabling the CBD revitalization plan to happen. This would be done through deproclaiming the CBD part of the R43 and replacing it with the bypass, that yellow. So, will it actually do it? In other words, will it fill this claimed need, or these two claimed needs? And here one should note that these are essentially municipal and not provincial traffic needs. Replacing 3 kilometers of the R43 with another 3 kilometers, with a significant part still within the urban area, doesn't mean that the bypass will suddenly make it any more possible for the R43 to be able to function as a provincial connector, which is, after all, what the province is supposed to be concerned with. So we get back to the claimed benefits, the first one of easing congestion. And we have to say that the traffic benefits are not very exciting. Essentially, the bypass will offer less than 2 minutes off your travel time compared to taking existing routes. And secondly, if we look at the CBD revitalization, Main Road is not essential to the CBD revitalization framework. That framework actually states that the relief road, the blue one, will cope with any congestion caused by the pedestrianization of High Street, which is a central part of that. Even the project realizes that these benefits are underwhelming, but they postulate that they may well be needed in the future. And so the proposed route, the proposed favored route through Fernkloof, must be secured with a road reserve, just in case this future arrives. It seems increasingly unlikely in our current circumstances that a future that assumes a growth rate in traffic of about 2.2% will arrive for a very, very long time indeed. And again, I want to repeat what Michael has said. Whale Coast Conservation is not against a bypass per se, should the need and the desirability be proven. However, we are implacably against any route for a bypass going through any part of Fernkloof at any time, now or in the future. There are alternatives to this selected northern route which goes through Fernkloof, and the environmental impact assessment process requires, right up front, that all feasible alternatives are investigated fully. I'd like Rob to just tell us whether that has actually been done.
Thank you, Pat. Well, the EIA process, after you've proven the need, in this case, the traffic mobility and accessibility, could lead to the identification of feasible alternatives to satisfy the need. Thereafter, the relative desirability of each alternative needs to be considered to select a preferred alternative. One of the alternatives must always, of course, be the so-called no-go option, which requires identifying all the consequences of doing nothing at all. During this process, it's extremely important to consider alternatives and desirability according to the mitigation hierarchy. It entails choosing as a preferred alternative the one that avoids negative impact and obviously maximizes positive impact, or has the lowest negative impact, and or allows the greatest opportunity to moderate, mitigate, and rehabilitate the impacts, both at the construction stage and of the ongoing operational project. The consultants submitted a final EIA report for the CBD bypass road to the provincial authority that was rejected in March 2018. The reasons for the rejection is a whole list of shortcomings, some of which will be unraveled during the course of this presentation. For clarity, we are now dealing with what is termed the amended final EIA report. And it is intended to address the shortcomings for which the earlier final report was rejected by province. The rejection letter calls for the potential loss of attractive protected area as a key aspect, to quote, key aspect triggering the potential negative impact rating. And that it is, again to quote, not solely the impact itself, but the fundamental principle of the loss of protected land that has to be considered. Now, because it has been considered right from the outset by the municipal administration that the loss of land from Fernkloof Nature Reserve is of little or no consequence, and that the expropriation costs have assumed to be zero. The first step in the mitigation hierarchy, in other words, the avoidance of expropriation of land from Fernkloof Nature Reserve, has never been seriously considered by the consultants. It's been an assumption that that will be a given. As a matter of environmental ethics, preservation of the boundaries of this protected area should have been a first principle, and encroachments on the boundaries should have been rejected ab initio. This would have naturally led to the consideration of alternative routings that do not entail any encroachment into the Fernkloof Nature Reserve. So let's look at what alternatives have been considered within the EIA process, the Environmental Impact Assessment process. Firstly, no alternative has been considered for the section of the bypass route through Fernkloof Nature Reserve from Gateway to the end of Mountain Drive. That's the eastern end, which is at Magnolia Street end. The only alternatives that have been at all considered during the process of the impact assessment are the so-called north and south routes to the east of Mountain Drive. You'll see that on the screen at the moment. If you follow the line from the west, there's a single line and then it splits into two lines. The one to the on the lower side is known as the southern alternative, and the one to the north is what is preferred by the consultants and by the municipality or by the municipal administration as being the northern route. So those are the only alternatives that have been considered. Now let's look at what other alternatives have been proposed but been rejected by the consultants. Ward 3 Committee, which is the only organ of the municipality or the council which has considered this in any official capacity, and the INAPs, the interested and affected parties that have made comment, have made several alternative proposals, including upgrading existing roads and introducing public transport. Now, the upgrading of existing roads was dismissed by the consultants right at the outset on the basis that none of those roads comply with the provincial road standards. And secondly, the introduction of public transport has been dismissed out of hand by the Director for Infrastructure and Planning on the basis that there's no financial justification for it. It would not be financially viable in his view. But the Overstrand Municipal Integrated Transport Plan, which is referred to in the Overstrand's Integrated Development Plan, which is the basis for all the budgeting and planning for the municipality, calls for, and I quote, provision of regular and safe public transport on all the routes, including upgraded public transport facilities for commuters. If you look again at the Ward 3 committee, even in the current IDP, Integrated Development Plan, they are promoting the introduction of public transport in and around the central business district of Hermanus. So to set aside those as, to use those, to set aside those from being considered as alternatives during the environmental impact assessment is clearly not appropriate. We need to look at what the provincial letter of rejection for the previous environmental impact assessment report is, what it says about alternatives. Firstly, it's very critical of the fact that there's been a failure to consider all the alternatives, particularly in the light of the strong public sentiments that have been expressed throughout the environmental impact assessment public participation process. And it notes that partnering with the municipality to achieve desired traffic outcome by upgrading existing roads has not been explored as an alternative in the process. So it provides a statement directly there that that should have been considered as an alternative. And it states clearly in the letter that municipalities' need for a bypass road to achieve the Central Business District Revitalisation Plan is not a justification for the bypass at all, and that only transport and time-saving issues can be used as reasons for the bypass. I want to now turn to looking at the desirability aspect. This is also a very important component of choosing the preferred alternative. Now, consideration of desirability in any EIA process, environmental impact assessment process, is very broad. It does not just focus on environmental, but it includes social, economic, visual impact, sense of place, culture, heritage, spiritual, and any other potentially negative aspect that might occur during the construction or operation of the proposed project. Now, let's start by looking at the key negatives as viewed by Whale Coast Conservation. Firstly, the bypass requires deep reclamation and expropriation of a substantial part of the most biodiverse area of the Fernkloof Nature Reserve. Now, many people have said that that is a degraded area, but in fact, if you look at the picture that's in front of you, you'll see it's by no means degraded. There are a couple of little patches where there have been disturbances, but it's by no means degraded, and it is in fact the most biodiverse area of the whole of the Fernkloof Nature Reserve. That area that they want to expropriate is equivalent to about 5 rugby fields of area. And there will also be, of course, that's the completed road. There will also, of course, be collateral damage, which is inevitable in any road construction process. And you can see there a photograph of what is happening along the Stanford to Hermanus upgrade. There's considerable collateral damage around the actual footprint of the road. And in particular, fynbos that will be disturbed is very difficult to re-establish once it has been disturbed. Secondly, the bypass transacts an area that currently provides a very gentle transition between the urban and the unspoiled, irreplaceable, protected, proclaimed fynbos reserve. That area is an area in which people enjoy peaceful and restorative spiritual, sports, country market experiences, amongst others. It's an area in which children go to school in a quiet country-like atmosphere. And to put a road through this now, of this nature, is going to dissect it and going to disrupt that peaceful country atmosphere. This is something that should not be wanted by anybody living within the area here. Just look now at what the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment Report, claims as being the positives of putting the road through this particular area. Firstly, it says that there's going to be an improved travel time of up to 2 minutes over the current route. It's hardly a significant saving in time. Secondly, it says it supports the CBD, Central Business District Revitalization Plan. It eases access to schools, churches, sports grounds, and the country market. Now, as we've seen from, as I've said, from the letter that was provided as part of the rejection of the previous attempts to get this passed, those issues are not deemed by the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning at the provincial level as being a justification at all for this bypass road. They have specifically said that that should be improved travel time and traffic control and traffic management. So the second reason that's provided in the environmental impact assessment is null and void, essentially, in the eyes of the provincial authorities. These claimed positives do not at all compensate for the irreplaceable section of the proclaimed Fernkloof Nature Reserve, and neither do they compensate for the intimate connection that currently exists between the town and nature and the social, spiritual, recreational, and country atmosphere that will be lost permanently through the implementation of the proposal. Now, moving on from this to the point at which the assuming that there was no way that any other alternative could be found to going through this area that I've just described. There is provision made in the National Environmental Management Act legislation for where there is a conservation-worthy area or an area in which there are serious impacts which cannot possibly be avoided, then that legislation offers the possibility of what they call an offset. And in its rejection letter, the province required that the developer, in consultation with Cape Nature, appoints an independent practitioner to identify what they termed a possible biodiversity offset that could compensate for the fynbos area that would have to be expropriated from Fernkloof Nature Reserve. And I hand back now to Pat, who's going to deal with what has been proposed as the biodiversity offset.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, biodiversity offset. It's a strange word, but basically the principle of a biodiversity offset is that where loss to a conservation-worthy area, and particularly a protected area, is unavoidable, which is certainly not the case here, a sort of quid pro quo or a compensation in kind can be made, with the expectation, of course, that it will be on a like-for-like basis and that it will function as a substitute for this loss in perpetuity. And for a loss to a protected area, the expectation is that the offset will result in an area that can also be added, if not to the original area, at least to the protected area network. So what compensation can be made for the loss of part of a protected area such as Fernkloof? And bear in mind that Fernkloof is a tiny reserve of exceptional biodiversity. It's recognized as a center of endemism, and that the loss will be in the most biodiverse, as Rob mentioned, and the most vulnerable because of its shape, the most biodiverse and vulnerable section of the reserve. The bypass will also involve the loss of part of a wetland on the golf course, although not formally proclaimed as a nature reserve, that's the area which we've outlined there with the red dots. Although it's not formally proclaimed as a nature reserve, this wetland is protected through the previous environmental management plan imposed on the golf course. And although the project has given a nod in the direction of the mitigation hierarchy that Rob mentioned for the wetland, it's made an adjustment to the route that would lessen the damage. Building roads is bad news for wetlands. So let's look at this biodiversity offset that's proposed. And here we are in, I can only call it Monty Python territory. The biodiversity offset proposed for the loss to Fernkloof and the wetland through the bypass is to clear alien vegetation in part of the Onrus River between the De Bos Dam wall and the Onrus estuary for a maximum period of 5 years. So here we've got the map in front of us. Maybe Michael, you could just go back to the map, thank you. And let's have a look at this area. It's the area which is got a few very pretty colors on. Few pretty colors on it because it's actually the area proposed for the offset is a patchwork of ownership. Most of it's privately owned, just under 3/4 of it is privately owned. Some of it is owned by the municipality, just over, a squeak over 1/4 of it, and a very, very small amount is public land. None of the private landowners have been consulted on this proposal, nor has the Onrus Mountain Conservancy. And how it will be secured in perpetuity with that ownership structure, let alone added either to Fernkloof or to the protected areas network, is anyone's guess. Much of the land proposed, as we can see, for this offset also comprises of multiple fingers of land stretching up small watercourses into the catchment on the mountains. That's very difficult terrain to clear aliens in. The municipality land in particular is heavily infested with invasive alien vegetation, some ironically originally planted by the municipality as a labor creation scheme, I hear. And this compromises flow of the Onrus River, and it's a real fire hazard. And this situation has long been a source of concern. But the Overstrand municipality already has a pre-existing legal obligation to clear alien vegetation in land under their control, as have the private landowners, including the area in question, where they've been asked to do exactly that for many years. The municipalities made some past attempts at clearing, but often, sadly, with disastrous results. Will they clear it this time? Not if the extent of alien infestation in the Overstrand is any gauge, nor the fact that the entire current alien clearing budget for the Overstrand is a massive 250,000 Rand, or that the municipality has many current directives from the Department of Environmental Affairs to clear its land. Fernkloof itself would be overrun with aliens were it not for the tireless and self-funded work of organizations like the Botanical Society and some passionate individuals. So, what are the benefits of this proposed offset? The authors claim 2 benefits: improved health of the Onrus estuary owing to the improved flow of the river. If it does improve the flow, this is indeed likely to happen, but it'll be short-lived. Remember that the clearing will take place for 5 years at the most. Part of the area, that's the so-called municipal farms, will be given to Fernkloof. That's another benefit under the, I did warn you it was Monty Pythonish, because these are heavily degraded, and they are infested with aliens. The Fernkloof Management Plan, which is still under consideration, proposes that they be incorporated into Fernkloof, but with no budget, no resources to rehabilitate them. A very large Trojan horse indeed, maybe rather a poisoned chalice. So, as with the traffic benefits, the offset benefits are rather underwhelming, to say the least. But let's have a look at the plan. Let's have a look at the operational aspects. How will they accomplish this clearing? Who knows? None of the detail that is necessary to be able to assess the plan is provided. It's claimed to be a, quote, conceptual offset management plan, and that it will need to be revised, refined, and or updated as and when the bypass has been approved and prior to the implementation of the offset. What information is given is so scant as to be meaningless. This despite the requirement of the department to provide full information that would enable assessments to be made and decisions to be taken. This also applies to the costing, where a simple calculation using the figures that are given shows that the range should be in the area of about 4.3 million to 6.3 million rather than the 1.4 million that is actually given. It's rather a large discrepancy there. Remember also, this is only for clearing and stacking. Disposal has not been covered, and this is often the most difficult part of the exercise. It's one thing to chop down a large tree, but getting rid of it is another story altogether. The offset plan, then, it's supposed to provide an environmental compensation for the loss of land from a formerly protected area and the loss of wetland protected by a previous management plan. These are extremely serious issues. This offset plan doesn't even begin to approach the gravity of the issue. So who's responsible for it? Well, the plan has been compiled by the manager of the Environmental Management Services Department of the Overstrand Administration, housed under the Infrastructure and Planning Directorate, together with 2 members of the project consulting team. The composition of this team is against the express wishes of the Department of Environmental Affairs for the Overstrand administration to distance themselves from the process and to be a commenting authority and not a member of the project team. So muddy waters. Rob, maybe you'd like to shed some light on this mud, or not?
Thanks, Pat. Well, the letter of rejection from the provincial authority requires the inclusion of an unambiguous statement of support by the municipality for the preferred alternative for the bypass road. Now, as Pat has said, and as you see in front of you, the municipality is required to be a commenting authority and should not play a role as a project participant. The Fernkloof Nature Reserve was proclaimed for the purpose of conserving the botanical habitat and the biodiversity of the area. And the municipality, as the management agent, is required to manage the Fernkloof Nature Reserve in compliance with the National Environmental Protected Areas Act, according to which the municipality should not consider any development that is not consistent with the purpose for which the reserve was declared in the first place. The fact that administration has considered this particular development, in fact promoted it, indicates their lack of understanding of the obligations under that Protected Areas Act, as does its dismal failure to draft a halfway acceptable protected areas management plan for the reserve in the first place. municipal administration motivated for the bypass around the town, years about 2007, 2008. And the proposal was that it would go through the Fernkloof Nature Reserve. It's reiterated its support for the road through the Fernkloof Nature Reserve in a letter in 2007, and again in 2019, in a letter in 2017, and again in 2019, a letter signed by the municipal manager with inquiries redirected to the infrastructure and planning director. The Ward 3 committee is the only organ of council that has considered the bypass at all, and it rejected the bypass going through Fernkloof Nature Reserve and specified that it must go along the route of the Relief Road. If the administration was acting objectively, the 2017 letter by the Director of Infrastructure and Planning and the 2019 letter signed by the municipal manager should have indicated Ward 3's opposition to the bypass through the Fernkloof Nature Reserve and its request for the adoption of the Relief Road route as the CBD bypass. This would have led to a proper investigation of alternatives as a part of the environmental impact assessment. And this is, again, as I stress, the Ward 3 position is not only a statement by Ward 3, but it's recorded in the Integrated Development Plan for the municipality, which is the fundamental planning document for the municipality, and it was passed by council. Now, the recent press release by the Executive Mayor indicates that council is not and will not consider the need for a bypass or the route it should follow until the traffic flow on the R43 on either side of Hermanus has been addressed. Unfortunately, the Mayor's press release has not clarified the Council's position regarding the bypass through Fernkloof Nature Reserve, nor has it clarified its position on whether the north or the south route alternatives are preferred, nor has it retracted the municipal manager's support on behalf of the municipality. We contend that the municipality administration, the municipal manager, has gone beyond his authority in stating such support. The provincial rejection letter's requirement that the municipality, and I put the municipality in quotes there because the municipality is a combination of both council, elected officials, and administrative officials, must clarify its position regarding the passage of the bypass road through Fernkloof Nature Reserve and give what is the preferred alternative according to the municipality. Neither of those requirements have been met by the statements that have been made by the Executive Mayor, which essentially has just muddied the water a bit further. The Ward 3 committee, which includes representatives of the Hermanus Ratepayers Association, the Hermanus Business Chamber, and organisations associated with Fernkloof Nature Reserve, has made a clear statement. The public has made indication of rejection. A letter to which Whale Coast Conservation is now a signatory, amongst several other organisations, has been sent to the Mayor asking him to withdraw the municipal manager's letter of support. We live in a democracy. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, why on earth do our elected officials in council not respect the wishes of the people and actually state what is being asked for by the people? Well, Pat is going to talk about what public involvement has been up to this point and where we need to go from this point. Thanks, Pat.
Yes, indeed, the voice of the people. We do live in a democracy. We've got to uphold it. The people have certainly given voice on the Hermanus CBD bypass proposal. The proposals attracted a lot of comment, overwhelmingly adverse. But unfortunately, these voices have fallen on deaf ears. And as we all know, they're none so deaf as those who don't want to hear. The response to the input received from the public by the consultants has, I have to say, been scant superficial, cursory, and very possibly just inept. This proposal, right from the initial, the so-called scoping phase, has generated an enormous amount of concern and adverse reaction from the public, many of whom are experts in relevant fields. These concerns have been voiced in often very substantive, well-reasoned and comprehensive responses to the various documents to date. But the cursory and dismissive nature of the response to these comments is cause for concern, and I would say even suspicion. Comments have been grouped together and extensive charts have been drawn up from this. And this gives the impression that the comments have been, in fact, carefully considered, but the results are often highly subjective. The executive summary of the latest version, I want to use this as an example. Executive summary of the latest version, the amended final environmental impact assessment, notes that 155 comments and 2 petitions were received. It fails to mention that the first petition, dealing specifically with objections to the bypass, you've got it there on your screen, and I hope you all signed it, with objections to the bypass going through Fernkloof, had over 8,000 signatures. And the second, that allowed signatories to voice their objections to any development in Fernkloof, that's the one on your screen now, had over 11,000. That's a lot of people. However, figures given in the executive summary refer only to the comments received, the 155, ignoring the petitions, a grand total of 3% of the comments, and depending on how you deal with your decimals, that's 4 or 5 respondents, supported the bypass proposal. Of the remaining 97% of the comments, the following percentages are given as objecting on the basis of various things: lack of need, adverse impact on Fernkloof, which is given 65% there, adverse impacts on schools, on visual quality, sense of place, on the golf course wetland, and the noise that the bypass is going to generate. But if we look at the over 19,000 opposing voices from the petitions, or even just at the over 8,000 from the first bypass-specific petition, if those are considered, the 3% in favor of the bypass becomes statistically negligible, and the percentage citing opposition to the proposed route due to the adverse impact on Fernkloof is overwhelming. It's over 99%. So the executive summary does note that the comments state that the claimed benefits of the bypass do not justify its adverse impacts, and that strong objections have been voiced to both of the 2 alternatives proposed that go through Fernkloof. That's the northern and the southern routes. Neither are acceptable to the respondents. Despite this overwhelming objection to the proposal, the consultants conclude that the impacts are in fact acceptable. The question has to be to whom, and that the northern route is the one to go for. And here I think we have to ask, what part of no do you not understand? So, unfortunately, although the public participation process is designed to give the public a voice in the decision-making process, it seems that the consultants feel that there's no onus on them to hear that voice or to take it into account. The clear voice of the people can in fact be denied. It's perfectly possible to turn the proverbial deaf ear to it. So what's the solution? What do we do? It's simple. Shout louder and carry on shouting, please. Okay,
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, Pat. As Pat has just said, our voices have been ignored, and only 155 formal comments were given in the last round. So this is where we really need to emphasize that this is the last chance for our voices to be heard. We need all of you to formally write and object or comment on this proposal. The deadline for this is the 31st of August. And as mentioned in the beginning, in the first week of August, you will be hearing from us and receiving a step-by-step guide on how to submit your own objections and how to share this with others. I urge you that this is going to take a collective effort if we are going to stop this, and numbers matter. We need an overwhelming number. We know that most people are against this. From the 19,000 people who signed the petition, we now need you and everyone else that you know who have signed the petition, others, to once again resubmit your formal objections and comments. If you have any questions between now and the deadline for the submission, you're more than welcome at any time to email our EcoWatch team. As I mentioned in the beginning, that this webinar is being recorded, so please feel free to share it. And now I'm going to open up to questions. If you could please direct your questions to either to Rob or to Pat. We also do have, and I hope they're still online, the Ward Councillor for Ward 3, Carrie Bryce, as well as the Chairman of the Ratepayers Association, Bob Stanway, is also online. And so please ask your questions and I will try my best to answer them. We'll direct them to either Pat or to Rob. And you also, if you are streaming on Facebook and listening to this, you may also ask your questions on Facebook and we'll try and answer them, or you can raise your hand if you have a comment for us. So I wanted to start by saying we did receive comments from Martin, Andrew, and Gus, and thank you for submitting your questions to Anina before the call. And if you feel that we haven't answered this thoroughly in this webinar, please will you raise your hand and we will come to you. I'm going to try and just get to the Q&A section now. Bob has raised his hand, Stanway, so I'm going to try and get to you, Bob.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just to clarify, I'm not chairman of the Ratepayers Association. No, I was chairman until 2 years ago. The current chairman is Brian Ridgway. But can I just make a couple of comments? I think there were two excellent presentations. And, you know, rather than asking questions of Pat and Rob, just sort of asking some additional questions. And that is why the Overstrand and provincial officials not willing to consider alternative solutions. You know, they've basically said that public transport won't work, non-motorized transport won't work, no other solutions will work. But I think it's common cause that there's a genuine need to find a holistic transport solution for Hermanus. You know, it's not just the bypass is going to be a solution, or it's not going to be a solution. You know, we really need a civil society to have a much better town. You know, and some of the realities are that there's a huge shift of residential and employment, you know, to the west of the CBD. I think everybody has felt that, you know, with the mall opening and so on. There's also quite a big growth in peak traffic immediately west of the CBD. You know, there's a need to address the school traffic on Mountain Drive. There's a need to support the redevelopment of Hermanus CBD with sustainable transport. And you know, it's just like an unanswered question that I think civil society is battling with, is why is the municipality and the province not willing to consider a more holistic and sustainable transport solution for Hermanus? You know, what is going on? Thanks, Michael.
Thank you very much. We've got the question from Pat Redford. Fragmentation is a curse to any conservation area, and we all know this. We need corridors for wildlife to extend their ranges. This bypass sets the precedent for future similar decisions. Should we be emphasizing this as one of the most fundamental reasons not to proceed with the bypass? If you could answer that, Pat.
Okay, yes, I thoroughly agree with Pat on that one. Fragmentation, it's already been so fragmented. Fernkloof itself is very diffuse. It's got all these different areas. It's the cliff path is part of it, and Hoy's Copy is part of it, and et cetera, et cetera. It's fragmented already. It is one of the aspects that we all really, really stressed in the last comment, and I think we need to stress it again. And again, you know, we give very good reasons for why it's going to be disastrous. We give sightings of fauna on Mountain Drive. I mean, those of us who live in the area and who drive there at night will regularly see buck and mongoose and all that sort of thing. And their response basically is, no, it won't fragment it. So there's not much that you can do with that sort of response. Again, it's a question of they're none so deaf. So yes, stress it. It's terribly, terribly important. Yeah, I agree with you fully. So, and I saw that there was a brief comment from Terry Winstanley, who's an environmental lawyer, saying it's really, really important that comments are properly substantiated comments. Yes, that is so. And just to repeat again, we will be doing the Whale Coast comment and putting a process in place for people to be able to hook onto that. So yeah, I agree with that one as well. I just noticed that popping up on the screen. But yes, and can I also say something on Bob's point?
Of course.
Sorry, you've got to shut me up, you know me. So Bob's points are all very, very valid. And maybe it's because this municipality doesn't take transport issues seriously. I mean, I don't know whether that's true or not. I haven't seen any evidence to the contrary, though. I'd really like to see some people really engaging on things like public transport for the town, because that, of course, is the way to go. Rather than just saying, we can't afford it, there's no budget, but somehow there's going to be a budget for this thing. So, yeah, maybe it's just that the province is prepared to do a study on it because they're going to be footing the bill. But as I said in the beginning, it's really the issues that the bypass are supposed to be looking at are actually municipal issues. But there's an awful lot more municipal transport issues that need attention than just an area of the town where the need is much, much less than the other, than the western side of town. You're absolutely right on that. Okay, that's me.
We've got a question here from Josephine Frater. She said, what alternative forms of activism are being contemplated? This is a disgusting, wasteful proposed expense. And given that we have new expenses resulting from COVID-19, has Aled Windy been alerted to the controversy? Are publications like the Daily Maverick being alerted? Is this being discussed on the radio? I know this has been going for 12 years, so there might be some fatigue from the various journalists. But essentially, we are putting together this detailed objection from our side. And what we need help with is with contacts to journalists, for people to write letters. Today, we've had 90 people on this call. If each one of you got 10 friends and families to object thoroughly, that would be 900 objections, which would be incredible. 6 times what we had in the last round. But I agree that we do need to look at other forms of activism. We are a conservation agency, not a media platform, but we would really look to collaborate with anyone, any journalists, or any ideas that people have. I don't know if you want to add to that, Rob or Pat.
Well, perhaps I can say that the Hands Off Fernkloof movement has been very strong and active right throughout this process, and continues to be so. And they have been in touch with politicians at the provincial level and with local councillors in order to try to get provincial heads of department together to discuss with us what the reason, the rationale behind pushing this further is. Just to say that the letter that has now been sent to the mayor asking him to retract the municipal manager's letter has been copied also to the various politicians at the provincial level and at the local level again. So we're that organisation. We're not an activist organisation. We're a conservation services organisation. So it's not our role specifically, but we participate with the likes of the Hands Off Fernkloof organisation.
Thanks, Rob. I've just got Richard raising his hands. I know we've only got about 2 minutes left before our hour is up, but Richard, if you'd like to ask your question, I hope you can hear us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's actually Linda. I was just thinking to raise public awareness, as we did with the Hermanus Special Rating Area. Would it not be possible to stand outside Checkers or the Spa or wherever we can get a posse and give people information about what's happening and ask them to sign something?
Thank you. Look, I think we would welcome any ideas. Obviously, with COVID-19, it makes it extremely difficult. But what I would urge is, if any of you are, communicators or the secretaries in your church or in your schools or any groups, that you write to Anina. We are going to have a separate strategy session where people who represent a group, whether it's the hiking group or the Botanical Society or others, are all going to come together and see how we can speak to our members and see how we can speak to our schools or to our churches or to all of those, to the residents, and to see how we can spread this message. But even if just the people on this call can get their families, their friends, and their community to object, it would go a long way. We are going to do the hard work. We're going to put together a thorough document, and we're going to, in the first week of August, write very, very easy, simple steps on how you can use it and how you can lodge your own objections and how you can spread the message. So if you can wait until then, it gives us a full month then to get the message out and to get as many people to sign, not to sign a petition, but to actually put in a proper objection. If there are no
Michael, can I just say something on that?
Yes.
I think it's really important. I know we mentioned it in our presentations, but I think it's really important that we don't allow them to just put this on the back burner. This idea that they can build a road through Fernkloof has got to be stopped. Fernkloof's boundaries have got to be respected. We have to make the politicians and the administrators respect the legal protection that our nature reserve has. So I think that that's really important. We'll obviously stress it yet again in our document, but there's nothing stopping people doing their own objections. But I'd really urge them to just include that, because we don't want it to, in 30 years' time, raise its ugly head yet again.
Thank you, Pat. Rob, you had a comment?
Yes, just Michael, in terms of raising awareness, we understand, it's subject to confirmation, of course, when we see the newspaper tomorrow, but we understand that the Hermanus Times tomorrow will carry quite an extensive article based on the material that we've presented tonight. And of course, as you've said, this particular webinar material presentation will be available on the Whale Coast Conservation Facebook and YouTube channel, so people can refer back to this and promote awareness through just distributing the URLs for those sites.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, and I know we've got a couple more comments about Esna's asked whether we can provide an article. Yes, we can, to the Heritage newsletter of the Gullis Heritage newsletter. We are available for interviews. Rob and Pat will be available for the next couple of weeks. Please write to Nina if you've got any ideas for us, and we really appreciate you taking the time on this cold evening to join us. We thank you for your passion, and we urge you to continue to support us and object to this. And thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. Have a good evening. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Rob, for taking the time to give us that presentation. Have a good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all. Keep well. Goodbye.
Thanks to everyone.